Good morning, everyone. This is Nathaniel Lee. Thank you for joining our show once again today. We're going to have some exciting topics to talk about. I have a superstar panelist, attorney Vanita Banks, master's in tax, cybersecurity expert, former president of the National Bar, just a outstanding, one of the top lawyers in America. But before we get started today, as always, I implore the people in our community, stop the gun violence. We have to work as a community to get rid of this cancer problem. We have state laws that basically allows anyone to carry a gun openly, and many citizens are taking advantage of it and look like we don't understand as adults and teenagers de-escalation. Because people have a gun, they think they have to use it even when they get into minor disagreements. Folks, if you have a hot temper, leave your gun at home. We need to work together to reduce this senseless violence. The same thing in Chicago. They have numerous problems. And I know my special host today, Attorney Banks, could probably speak to that, because Chicago have too many shootings, LA and all the cities. And I'm just sick of it. I wake up every morning now, in the first news story, somebody's gotten shot, or somebody's shooting somebody, or somebody got shot by a police officer. It never stops. Starting today, let's have the next couple of weeks, let's see, can we reduce the violence before Christmas, please. Attorney Banks, hopefully the shooting in Chicago is reduced a little bit. How's it going up in your neck of the wood?
We have the same systemic situation nationally, Attorney Lee. And as I mentioned in earlier shows, we really need to look at the report and recommendations in President Obama's 21st century policing reform and recommendations. It contains a playbook on how to address these systemic issues. Absolutely, there are too many guns on the streets of America, more guns than citizens. We also know that no other nation has this problem. This is a problem unique to the United States because of the proliferation of guns in our communities. And so from my perspective, we need a holistic approach to this issue, that there is a playbook that, as a result of a task force that was formed during President Obama's administration, the 21st Century Police Reform and Recommendations report was disseminated. And it should be a playbook for cities across this nation as they are addressing this issue. It includes, as you know, there has to be a collaboration between the police departments across our nation and their citizens. In Chicago, there is a community oversight committee that is actively engaged in this ongoing process. As you know, the city of Chicago is also subject to a consent decree. Many of those were, I won't say discontinued, but that whole approach was halted under the former president's administration. And so again, a holistic approach. There is a lack of trust, well-founded lack of trust between communities and police forces across our nation. I remember a time growing up in Indianapolis, Nathaniel, where there was what we called a community policing model. And where when the officer, passed by on the street, we all waved, right? And officers were, when we went up to the community centers, the Boys and Girls Club and the Salvation Army community centers, many of the adults that were supervising, or some of the adults supervising those activities, were actually police officers. And so that has changed over the last 30 years, and we need to get back to some of those models.
Well, one of the things that was critical is that in our state, what was tragic is the Republican-controlled legislators allowed the passage of a law that allows individuals to own gun, carry them without license. I'm a big believer of that. I support the Second Amendment. I think people have a right to own guns, but also I believe in gun safety. And here's what I mean. Number one, I think that there should be background checks. Number two, if you have a person who's been engaged in domestic violence and things like that, I think they should be denied the opportunity to own a gun until they get the matter cleared up, because a lot of our homicide involve people who have ill temper who take it out and cause death. The third thing, though, is that the gun safety, we have to educate parents, if they're going to own guns, how they should store their weapons to keep their teenage kids from getting access to them. So I saw we had a 3-year-old shoot a 2-year-old. I mean, it's crazy when I see stuff like that, because people owning gun doesn't have a clue about gun safety. So I want to start talking about this subject matter, because we just got to stop this senseless violence in our community. Please, 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 use calmer heads, cool down. Now, the second issue, speaking of Chicago, Attorney Banks, I had a problem with the prosecution of Jesse Smollett in Chicago. I thought about that case and some cases I've done in Chicago. And the case I dealt with, particularly with police officers, there was a consistent pattern of them being deceitful and dishonest. And so they're prosecuting this gentleman for basically lying to police officers and lying to the public, which I experienced with my cases there. It was just baffling to me that they went forward this prosecution. And quite frankly, I was troubled by it. I don't know. Not that I'm a fan of Smollett or anything like that. I just didn't like the idea of the grandstanding prosecution and I thought more of it what it should have been, quite frankly. But other people differ.
Attorney Lee, there are strong opinions on both sides of this issue from the very inception until now. And you'll recall, going back several years now, initially the charges were dropped. The prosecution under Kim Foxx, our state's attorney, declined not to move forward. There was a plea in the case, and I think community service was part of that plea, which was in part brokered by the legendary Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. After those actions, there was an outcry that led to a continued investigation, as well as the subsequent prosecution of Mr. Smollett, which led to a guilty verdict and I believe 150-day prison sentence. He served 6 days of that sentence before he was set free, potentially pending his appeal. And that appeal to the Illinois appellate court was rejected yesterday. And he has indicated, his attorneys have indicated that he will be appealing this matter to the Illinois Supreme Court. So that's where it stands. Again, very strong opinions on both sides of this issue.
Well, I'm going to follow that because I'd like to see how that end up. Hopefully, I'd like to see the Illinois Supreme Court take a look at that. The next issue I've been watching this week, for the first time in a long time, we're watching a major case play out on live TV, Attorney Banks. And one of the cases I watched this week between trials myself was the case involving the Georgia fake elector type case against, and I think originally it was like, what, 19 defendants, including the former president and his lawyers. And that case is ongoing. But the reason that I want to discuss this, it was a fascinating argument that I witnessed this week. That is that the defense attorneys were claiming that the action that their clients undertook was protected by the First Amendment. And the First Amendment does have its limitations. For example, the First Amendment, for example, give the rights of free speech. But if you're in a theater, in a dark theater, if you yell fire and cause a big commotion, people get injured, you can be prosecuted. So my thought process, the more I looked at this process, was how would they use the First Amendment? And then one argument, Attorney Banks, that was really, really fascinating. The lawyers kept saying, at no time in American history has ever a former president been prosecuted and brought to trial. And the prosecutor said, well, no time in American history ever have a former president do anything like what this president did. I mean, in a nutshell, they were saying that, and the third factor that was fascinating about the case is the lawyers now who represented him and advocated this, three of them have turned on their clients. They're giving adverse testimony against their own client, which is troubling in our justice system. And they've taken a plea agreement. And they got suspended sentence, probation, and a fine. And so for that, they agreed, I guess, to rat out their clients that they formally represent, which is a bad thing, I think. But in terms of lawyers being able to testify against their former clients, you know, I don't know. It's troubling to me, but that's the case.
These cases absolutely turn the law on its head. The historic, traditional law, Attorney Lee, that we're all familiar with and have engaged through most of our legal careers. The whole concept of attorney-client privilege, the notion of attorneys ratting out on their clients, just turns the law on its head from my perspective. How they can cut pleas and face fines and walk away is perplexing to me, to say the very least. But starting from the main primary proposition here, you, in terms of, quote, fake electors, you cannot state that you won an election when all the facts and evidence and circumstances say that is not, demonstrate that that is not the case, and continue to perpetuate that myth, continue to incite citizens, resulting in what we saw, a near overthrow of our government on January 6th, and expect that there will be no consequences or accountability for those actions. And so you're absolutely right. The First Amendment does not permit anyone to cry fire falsely in a crowded theater.
Well, I think that's really good. Okay, caller, you have a question or comment for us today. We have a call on the line. What's your question or comment, sir?
Hey.
Hello?
All right.
Hello, we can hear you, sir. What's your question or comment for today? Legal issues of today?
Mr. Lee, I'd like to ask you a question. Don't you think that the genie's out of the bag in terms of trying to eliminate gun violence? It's almost like the national right to be able to vote. We need to get some political change in this country. You've already given these folks, well, let's put it like this. We've already got the right to vote. Now we've got a right in the state of Indiana to carry a gun without a permit. And that's what I mean by the genie's out of the bag. How do you get it back in there? I'd just like to hear your comments on that. I know it's frustrating. It frustrates me and everybody else in this country in terms of what's going on, and particularly in Indianapolis, what's going on with gun violence, and for that matter, the state of Illinois and the Chicago area itself. So I'm going to just sit back and listen to your comments about that. I think.
Well, what do you think?
There's a problem.
But the problem, though, is the city of Indianapolis in the recent mayor's election showed that the city is a solid Democratic city and county, right? But the Democrats in the state legislature are a small minority, and in the Senate, there's a supermajority. So the net result is legislation that impact the daily lives of citizens of Marion County are adversely impacted by the laws that are passed at the State House. Well, the only way we can fix that is that the citizens of Marion County, the 467,000 Democratic voters, somehow have to show up at the poll in the next election, like 99%. And that's the only way the Democrats could win a statewide office, whereby you have the governor and the attorney general. And then you could address these draconian laws because they adversely impact our daily lives now. Every morning I wake up now, there's somebody been shot. I'm sick of it.
Oh, and I am too. But at the same time, like I said, you've given everyone, or at least in this city, in this state, you've got a right to carry a gun. And speaking of elections coming up, we got a character that's getting ready to run for governor, this Mike Braun guy who used to be a senator, or still maybe is. And he's saying he's going to fix all the problems, including all the immigrants coming into this town and the town of Chicago. He said he's got a plan. He went down to the border. And I'm sure he's not going to be one of those who wants to take away the rights of us being able to carry a gun and shoot each other. That would be part of his plan of getting rid of changing things as he's planning on doing. So, again, it just seems frustrating to both you and I and everyone else that cares about the communities we live in, that every day we get up, we hear about someone getting shot. At the same time, we got to get out and vote. But will we vote in masses? Will it be enough? Turn this thing around.
Well, see, here's the problem, caller, too, that this is very important, some important points you raise. They run for office and they do these dog whistle. We're going to get rid of the migrants. And the terms that they're using are incorrect. So they're confusing immigrants with migrant workers. Migrant workers could be people in America that go from place to place to work. Immigrants are people coming in the country to work, and they're confusing the two. But the point is, so we need those immigrants in our city. If you watch some of the major construction projects like roofing and stuff, every time that I've hired a roofing company, it's populated by people from Mexico, and they're doing a great job. Apparently, there's very few African Americans that are roofers. And so the net result is a lot of when I was downtown, all the commercial buildings that I was in, including the city county building, they had a high number of immigrants that the bathrooms, the hallway, mop the floors. And so all these jobs were populated by people who didn't mind getting their hands dirty and grease and stuff. And so if we have this type of government who say that we want to eliminate immigrants, well, who's going to do that type of work? They're paying $10.
Well, that's a good question. That's a good question. I'd like to ask the attorney out of Chicago how they're dealing with all those immigrants that are being dumped into the city of Chicago right now. They'll get on 65 South and head right back down here to Indianapolis, and we got a problem here too.
I know as Attorney Banks,
Well, there are a lot of issues to discuss. And first, with respect to gun violence, again, I'm advocating that everybody that's listening to this show today, please pull the 21st century recommendations on police reform. There's a lot of good model information contained in that report. With respect to guns and the proliferation of guns and the caller's remarks regarding, Indiana and the right to open carry, there's still tremendous amount of work that's being done. For example, yesterday, Congresswoman Robin Kelly and Senator Dick Durbin, both of Illinois, they are leading the congressional report for a proposed rule which would require gun sellers to be classified as a federal firearm licensee, which would expand background checks. Currently, there are lots of loopholes in the current legislation, and their recommendation of a rule to close that loophole with respect to background checks is a great initiative. There's also red flag laws that have been passed in many, many states. As you may be aware, Illinois passed a assault weapons ban recently as well. We also passed a law which would hold manufacturers accountable for marketing their products to young people. So there's a plethora of work that's being done to address gun violence in this country, if we have the political will to make it happen.
Well, thanks for that update, because none of that has been done in our state council, by the way. There's nothing been done.
There's a lot of work that's being done across the nation. The President Biden is doing as best as he can with all the executive orders that, he can. And so we, the people, have to just insist that this issue is important. And when we're looking at those that represent us from the city council all the way up to the president's office, these are some of the critical issues and questions we should be asking these people. So that's on gun violence. With respect to immigration, what we're doing in Chicago, just this week, there was a huge announcement by Mayor Brandon Johnson, and he was accompanied by many of the clergy across this city of Chicago. And they have volunteered to take in as many migrants as they can. And that's huge, because I can tell you it's unacceptable for migrant individuals to be housed in tents outside the police departments across this country. That's just unacceptable. And while cities like Indianapolis have committed to be sanctuary cities, and welcoming to people across the world, it shouldn't just be the burden of our welcoming cities to provide those necessary needs. But having said that, the clergy across this country, they are, as we speak, taking in as many migrants as they can. That's number one. And number two, a large area on, I can tell you later what side of town that's on, they are building a facility to house immigrants as the winter is quickly approaching. So that's what's specifically being done. And then, of course, there have been federal funds allocated for this purpose that's being used, and there are state funds as well as local funds. So all of the specifically allocated funds should be used for this purpose. And so I would recommend that the people of Indianapolis, that you draw the line to where those necessary funds are in your city and state budgets, and also where the federal allocations are as well.
Thank you very much.
Well, Attorney Banks, I appreciate you making that comment, because that's one of the other topics of discussion here in Indianapolis right now, outside of the gun issue, is that all the immigrants that are being dumped into Chicago and other cities around the country from Texas and California as they cross the border, and then they end up down in our city, so to speak. Not saying we're not accepting them, but it just seems like it's so much and such an overflow that is a concern for some of the residents here in the city of Indianapolis. So thanks for the update.
And caller, you're absolutely correct. That overflow, if you will, should be a predictable, natural result of the large influx of immigrants coming into the large sanctuary cities, and speak to the need for a holistic solution at this juncture. When you have governors like in the state of Texas actually placing immigrants on buses and sending them to New York and Chicago, that speaks to the need for a holistic solution as we move forward.
You know,
thank you. Have a good weekend.
Hey, counsel, I got a radical idea that could probably stop this governor from shipping these folks, these immigrants all over the country, you know, from Texas and places like that. If the president granted a pardon to all of these folks who illegally crossed, gave them some type of legal status. Right now, the immigrants that come in the United States, when they work, they pay taxes, but they're not entitled to any benefits of the United States government, such as Social Security benefits and things like that. But I've learned over the last several decades of my law practice that there's a lot of folks that are immigrants who work every day, pay taxes to our state and federal government, and they get a special tax ID number through the IRS. And it always troubled me. So they pay the taxes, federal, FICA, Social Security, all those taxes, but they're not eligible to receive the benefits because they never become United States citizens, but they are a tax-paying individual, and it never made a lot of sense to me. I quite frankly, I don't understand that. The government tax you when you're a legal immigrant, but you don't get a chance. If you get laid off from work, you don't get unemployment benefits. If you get injured at work or in our tort system, you're treated the same way. So you get injured in a car accident, we collect money for you the same way. Or you get injured at work, we can collect workers' comp. But you don't get the government benefits if you got laid off or if you retired. And that's something I think we have to fix. Now, there was a lot of other hot topics that hit the national radar this week, Attorney Banks. One that I thought was fascinating was the Congressman George Santos out of New York. I don't remember during my lifetime whether or not we've seen Congress expel one of his members with a greater than 2/3 votes. It was like about 70%. 104 Republicans, I think, voted against expulsion. And for the benefit of our audience, George Santos got a bunch of indictments, and basically they consist primarily of financial fraud type crimes, among other things. And so they obtained his records while he's under indictment for those. But there was another list of things that he did that went beyond criminal misconduct, just outright fraud. Like he fabricated his college background. He lied to his voters that his mother was in the tower. Just a whole series of lie after lie, allegedly, that they said on TV. And so the net result is the people in Congress, both Democrat and Republican, apparently got sick of this. The Ethics Committee, on a unanimous bipartisan basis, passed a resolution that was strongly in favor of expelling him from Congress, and that's what they did this week. And I watched part of that play out on TV, and I was thinking to myself, how could a person with such a flawed background get elected to Congress in the first place? Didn't make a lot of sense to me, Attorney Bank, just didn't.
From the very beginning, this has been an interesting journey with respect to Mr. Santos. I believe he's 35 years old. And from the inception, the tremendous outright lies that were on his resume. As you know, Attorney Lee, if we had lied on our resume for a position in corporate America or anything else we might be applying for that matter, and it was discovered, we'd be fired from those roles. And so from extensive lies on his resume in terms of where he went to school, his parents' heritage, to these now 23 indictments. And by the way, as you stated, and this was the third attempt to oust him, to expel him from Congress. It's only been done 6 times in history. And he's the only member, by the way, who was not convicted of a crime or being a member of the Confederacy that has been expelled from his seat. So, in fact, 3 times is a charge. And what the tipping point was the latest report from the House Ethics Committee. They did a thorough investigation. Part of it was simultaneous to the investigation that was being conducted by the Department of Justice. And by the way, the House Ethics Committee came up with some more referrals to the Department of Justice, who has indicted him on 23 criminal charges, including using his campaign for his own personal purposes and benefits. He's using his campaign funds to support his lifestyle, such as buying, and paying for Botox, designer clothes, OnlyFans of subscriptions. And our young listeners will know what that is. And so not filing, Attorney Lee, as you know, it's mandated, financial campaign disclosures that are required by law, either making false statements in those disclosure forms, knowingly false statements, or incomplete statements, and the failure to correct those statements. So he's been over, a long period of time since he entered the office, right, using his campaign for his own personal purposes, his own personal bank account, knowingly causing his own campaign to file false and incomplete, inaccurate supports, willfully violating various federal ethics laws, and regulations. And so this matter is without precedent. Some of the members of Congress, let me back up and say there were 4, interestingly, Attorney Lee, members of the Congressional Black Caucus that voted in this way. 2 members of the CBC voted against expulsion. These are Bobby Scott, Representative Bobby Scott, and Akima Williams. And on the grounds that there's no precedent and it would set a bad precedent to expel a member prior to a criminal conviction. Keep in mind, these are indictments. He hasn't been convicted yet. He's the first to be expelled without a conviction. And then there were 2 other members of the House that voted present. Those were Illinois Representative Jonathan Johnson and Al Green from Texas. So we had 4 members of the Congressional Black Caucus that voted in that way. And so while a member has never been expelled for prior to a conviction, this matter is without precedent in the sense that the number of member complaints, including from his own party, including from those members of his New York delegation, the number of House resolutions rejecting his conduct, and coupled with the federal criminal prosecution and the investigation of the House Ethics Committee, which reviewed over 130,000 pages of documents. They reviewed financial statements and dozens of witness testimony, led to the result yesterday, which was 311 members voted to expel him, exceeding the 2/3 majority vote, to 114 that were opposed.
Wow, that's incredible. What I don't understand, I saw some of the representative statements and they had different reasons. One of the issues is some wanted him to be actually convicted of the felonies before he got expelled from Congress, because you have the indictment in the Senate of Senator Menendez out of New Jersey, and he's got a series of indictments against him for financial crimes, among other things. And then, so they felt that you wait until the criminal justice system plays out, then you move to expel the person from the House. However, what you're saying, though, is pretty stark contrast, because we have an individual now that the House Ethics Committee had so much evidence of misconduct. Like one of the things I saw that was fascinating is that they use fake callers to pretend to be the Speaker of the House to raise money. You know, they exaggerate the amount of money in the campaign, make people think you're much more successful. He spent large sums of money on entertainment type items, including an adult website. You know, so there was a lot of different things that they had access to by subpoenas, bank records and things like that. And also, these House members, they had the TV interviews, hundreds of them. And we have a person who got elected to Congress who's bounced checks all over the world. I mean, you know, down in South America. And I mean, it was just bizarre to me as to how he managed to get away with this in his private life. It was just, the whole thing was bizarre to me. It's almost.
And I don't mean this to be a statement regarding the legal definition of this term I'm about to use, but from my perspective, there is clear and convincing evidence of these violations of so many aspects of his actions. He exploited and used and manipulated every single aspect of his candidacy for his own personal benefit. He stole from his campaign. He deceived his donors into thinking that they were donating to his campaign, but actually they were donating to his lifestyle. And so he reported fictitious loans and then pretended that he was paying them off. It's just a web of deceit, and ultimately led the House to conclude that he really was discrediting the office. And by 5 o'clock yesterday, they had taken his name off the door.
I thought that was cold. They changed the locks. They should, maybe in another world, another moment in time, maybe they've done that, but I've never seen that done before. They were showing on TV where they changed the locks on his office in the Capitol building. It was just incredible to me.
That is incredible. Also, I was reading about, as a former member of Congress, he still has certain benefits. He's too young to have earned a pension, of course, but he can buy his desk, his office desk, for $1,000 and then auction that off. He also can be present in the Capitol building as a former member of Congress.
Really?
And interestingly, his expulsion was more harsh than in 1856, when Preston Brooks, a pro-slavery Democrat, nearly killed one of his colleagues on the floor, of Congress with a cane, disabling him. He couldn't return to work for 3 years, and he was disabled for the rest of his life. So there was a vote to come up to expel him. That vote failed. Preston Brooks ultimately resigned, but I thought I'd throw that in as an historical note.
Wow. But I just couldn't fathom that they were able to, within a few hours, put a lock on his door. I mean, that was a part that I just
call facility services.
Yeah, but
it was cold. It was cold.
Yeah, I was thinking, I've just never seen anything like that before. I mean, normally, like, people don't pay their rent. It takes forever to evict them out of a house or apartment.
Had he packed his office? Well, I guess it didn't matter. Once he's expelled, everything belongs to the U.S. government. Doesn't belong to him. So,
when we look at the method that they treated this former Congress person, it highlights the distinction in the American justice system as to, in part, how they're treating the former president, in the sense that, he's got cases pending in multiple courts at the same time. And then there's one of the cases on the document case, it looked like he's getting what amount to preferential treatment in the case out of Fort Pierce, Florida, with Judge Aileen Cannon. And you watch these things go, and then you see what happened to Santos, and then you realize that there is a distinction as to how our justice system works. I guess that the Republicans themselves, as I understand it though, Counselor, the Speaker of the House, and I'm trying to figure out, does the assignment of offices. So that, I remember when our former Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, as the former Speaker of the House, they had a separate office, and she went to the funeral of Senator Feinstein. And while she was at the funeral, the interim Speaker of the House was vacating her office. And so that let me know that the Speaker of the House apparently have the innate authority to remove the former members of Congress right away. But the irony of that is the current Speaker of the House actually voted against expulsion, along with the Republican leadership, which was fascinating. So I'm trying to think, what must a congressional person do in order for the leadership in their party to get rid of them? How low is the bar?
Well, on future calls, if there's interest, we can talk about the 3 disciplinary measures, which include expulsion, which of course is the highest, censure and reprimand. We can look at some analogies of those that have been censured, reprimanded, and again, expelled. There's only 5 other situations in U.S. history.
Wow. Well, there's a few additional topics we could hit in the last 7 or 8 minutes. Let's cover a few more things. I've watched also the fraud trial in Manhattan involving the former president Trump, and the upper level, the appellate court in New York, apparently reinstated a gag order. His staff were getting threatening messages and calls of the judge. And it's kind of bizarre in terms of our legal system. I've never seen a defendant in a lawsuit openly criticize the judge who has to make the decision on their fate. There's different levels of suicide, but this got to be what is tantamount to legal suicide. Why would you attack the person who's going to make the ultimate decision of what happened to you in this civil litigation? I don't get it. A lot of legal scholars saying that maybe they're using that to leverage in their appellate court case by claiming judicial bias. However, you're creating a judicial bias in your own words and action, and that's what I don't get. I've never seen a litigant take on the judge and the staff in this fashion, ever. It's something unprecedented, counselor. It's just weird to me that somehow these lawyers could tolerate their client being so disrespectful to the system. It's just mind-boggling to me.
It's absolutely unprecedented, but so much is as we take this journey over the last several years. And as you know, if I was advising my client, when you advise your client, you tell them not to make any statements at all, right? You're not going to talk to the media. I mean, there's a whole playbook on managing a high-profile client. And so what we're witnessing goes against the grain of all of that. And the judge has remedies. I mean, these types of blatant attacks that are resulting in death threats to the judge and her staff should be viewed in such a way that potential sanctions, such as, first of all, gag order, and a strong gag order. And then secondly, you'll be held in contempt of court. Now, we don't want to see a former president be put in jail, right? We don't want to see that. But that may have to happen because those are the tools, the legal tools that should be used in these types of circumstances. But as you said, we're seeing the use of an overabundance of caution in this case because we're dealing with a former president.
Well, it's a scary prospect because the former president is announcing all types of threats to use the Justice Department to go after political rivals. He's openly advocating what would be tantamount the destruction of American democracy. In other words, the country, United States, above all, must stand for the rule of law. That is, that the axiom that no man or person is above the law. So what he's advocating in his campaign is that the United States become an authoritarian regime or a dictatorship. And so it's going to be interesting to watch how this unfolds. He's currently leading in the polls in the Republican primary. It looked like he's going to be clearly win their nomination. At the same time, he's likely to be convicted on one or more of the felonies that he's been charged with. But in the back of my mind, there's another civil trial starting in January about this sexual assault, Jean Carroll. You have this fraud case that's going to be ending probably real soon. And then you got all these mounting criminal cases back to back to back. And throughout it all, Attorney Banks, what I don't understand, and I watched some of these interviews, despite the fraud allegation, despite all these criminal cases, he's got a very strong core group of followers. And the thing that's mesmerizing to me is this: the people who are the witness against the former president, there are people that he hired, people that he trusted, his lawyers, his advisors. They're all are the witnesses against him. There's not a single Democrat I've seen that's key to his conviction in any of the criminal cases. Not a single Democrat. It's all people that work for him, they're confident, diehard Republicans. And it's going to be interesting to see how they continue this path of flipping the script to blame others for your misdeed. It's just mind-boggling to me, Counselor. It is.
We've never seen anything like this. And all of these cases, they're methodically working their way through the system. In fact, this week, Attorney Lee, you saw where the judge granted the police officers who filed suit against Trump in connection with January 6th, granted their petition to continue their complaint. And so all of these cases methodically working themselves through the system. And it's going to be very, very interesting at the end of the day how all of these play out. And as you said, the fundamental fabric of our nation, our democracy, is at stake here. The rule of law as we know it in this nation.
Yeah. Now, one final comment as a point of departure. There was another important issue that I neglect to talk about, Counsel. That is that the Senate voted to issue subpoenas to friends of Supreme Court Associate Justice Clarence Thomas. I've never seen that done before, but we have individuals who the comedian said have actually purchased a sitting Supreme Court judge. And it was his friend Harlan Crow, among others. And it's a sad day in American politics when a sitting Supreme Court judge becomes the butt of jokes. We are in a sad state when that occurs because so far, none of it has been disputed. And so our justice system relies on people that take the oath to take it serious and be fair and impartial. That means that justice should be blind and should not be bought and paid for by billionaires. That just shouldn't occur in the American justice system. But in conclusion, we'll be broadcasting again next week. We'll follow up. We have some interesting guests as we get into the holiday time period. I'd like to thank our caller for calling in, and for the folks that we can reach, I apologize. And for our superstar panel, Attorney Banks, thank you as always, and God bless everyone. We'll talk to you again next week. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye.